Hello, this is Jimmy Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Pentagon demands journalists pledge to not obtain unauthorized material from WashingtonPost.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, I think it should be the Pentagon should be the one protecting its papers rather than the journalist telling the journalists not to get them. Ultimately, I would say if the government does want to classify whatever it wants to classify, it should be able to. But if journalists do want to, uh, spread light on what the Pentagon's doing behind the scenes in order to give it accountability for its actions, I think that's okay too. Ultimately, people will justify whatever they want to justify, regardless of what system of government's in place. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Democratic lawmakers raise alarm in wake of shift report on Trump political banners from CNN. From CNN.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, this is just another Orange Man bad headline, I guess. I don't really care for Donald Trump, but I don't care for really Adam Schiff either. And yeah, it's the actual headline says mass managers of Trump's face are adoring some federal buildings in D.C. Democrats are crying foul. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Trump and how much he likes to circle jerk himself by putting his face with massive banners on the like. But ultimately, he's in the position of authority to justify doing whatever he wants to, pretty much, as long as there's not going to, as long as he can keep the backlash under control. Which I think he's usually pretty good at knowing what he can and can't get away with. So I think if he thinks he can get away with this, he's probably right. And yeah, I personally wouldn't like to be in D.C. and see all the giant banners of his face everywhere. But ultimately, if he wants to use the government's resources on that, and no one wants to have any backlash to it, that's on him. Reddit would of course think it's the worst thing ever, but I'm sure if Biden did the exact same thing, Reddit would be all over it, and they'd be jerking off to those Biden banners 24/7. So ultimately, it's people will justify what they justify, and yeah, that's my thoughts here. If Trump wants to put his face on a banner and he can get away with that, that's on him. Next, we have Trump firing top prosecutor for failing to invent fake crimes by foes. A U.S. attorney in Virginia is finding no evidence that Letitia James broke the law. In America, that's just where is this? In Trump world, it's a firing offense. And that's a link to the New Republic Substack page. I guess then it just says their Substack. I don't know if it's an article they have. Trump's firing top prosecutors for failing to invent fake crimes by foes. And that was posted by Stage 4 Locks, and that's crossed from the Law and Politics subreddit. And yeah, personally, if Trump wants to fire anyone for whatever reason he wants to, ultimately, a lot of people are going to defer to whatever the president says. I don't really care for it in the cult of the presidency, but, people will justify whatever the president says. And yeah, that's why I think probably the best option at this point is that the presidency is inherently corrupt, is realizing that the presidency is an inherently corrupt institution and getting rid of it, and the rest of the executive branch. But sadly, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Then we have coming soon, quote-unquote, peace president taking us back to Afghanistan, posted by Jedi Porcupine, and that looks like a true from Donald Trump. If Afghanistan doesn't give Bagram Air Base back to those who battles it, the United States of America, all caps, bad things are going to happen, for exclamation points, President DJT. And yeah, and then the OP added Donald W. Trump is looking for another foreign conflict. And yeah, it just goes to show you how, Donald Trump might market himself as being very different from the neocons who preceded him in the GOP establishment. But, he's just a secret neocon. He was like, I remember when we were getting out of Afghanistan, he wanted to take full credit for it, saying, that was my idea. Well, the only problem was Biden's execution. But now he's like, we got to go back into Afghanistan. That just goes to show you, Trump really has no values other than, whatever the people who are sucking his cock tell him, I would say. If they, he might say, "Oh, I'm anti-neocon," and then authorize a raid of John Bolton's house. But then Obama ran and said, "We gotta go back to Afghanistan." And it just goes to show you, just because he market himself as one way doesn't mean he actually is any different. And that's a lot of U.S. politics. U.S. politics is a lot of people saying, oh, we're different, the two parties are massively different, but in reality, they might market themselves like that, but they're pretty much the exact same two sides of the same shitty coin, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Tom Homan was investigated for accepting $50,000 from undercover FBI agents. Trump's DOJ shut it down from MSNBC.com, posted by LegioX. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But if they don't want to hold Tom Homan accountable since he's a member of the in group rather than the out group, that's usually what it seems to be like when it comes to politics. The in group will never be held accountable, but the out group needs to be held to the fullest extent of the law. I think it's all just a distraction, really. They're all pretty much in the in group in Washington, despite how they might mark themselves. I think it's all just mostly just WWE theater. It's not real. Politics isn't real. It's all kayfabe or however you pronounce that word. It's pretty much just professional wrestling, and that's pretty much what I'm seeing with stuff like this. Next, we have Pete Buttigieg goes viral for predicting Trump's free speech crackdown from LGBTQNation.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, personally, Reddit's all about free speech currently, but they've been justifying censoring the outgroup for years, but suddenly the in-group starts getting censored, and it's the worst thing ever. Where Joe Biden had a lot of government censorship as well, but Reddit doesn't care, especially in regards to COVID. His administration told social media platforms that they had to censor what they considered to be COVID misinformation, and yeah, you can see that in the Twitter files, which of course Reddit already buried under the rug and memory hold. But regardless, it just goes to show you how Reddit. Since the outgroup's in charge currently, it's the worst thing ever that Trump is taking Kimmel off the air. But when the in-group was censoring those who went against the official COVID narrative and such, it was completely fine. It just goes to show you these people have no values, only teams. I'm sure the next time a Democrat takes back the reins of the presidency, Reddit will justify everything they do. But now, since it's a Republican, Reddit thinks, oh my God, this is literally fascism. Even though I would argue both parties are pretty much fascist at this point, especially with how they use the state to control the narrative and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have remember Trump calling out Obama for his executive orders, posted by Stunning Performance 1, and that's a cross post from the Charts subreddit. What a year for executive orders, and that looks like a chart of all the executive orders per year since Bill Clinton took office. And it looks like there's been no year had more than 70, except for or no more year had more than 80. Until Trump's this year had 202. And yeah, I guess, Trump is hypocritical there, but, pretty much everyone in U.S. politics is hypocritical. Reddit would never call the Dems out for their hypocrisy, even though, that they're very hypocritical as well, because, Reddit's you might as well change it to republicansbad.com at this point, or blueanon.com. It's all just pretty much the shit libs, DNC shills, Marxists, circle jerking each other, and it gets tiring after a while. Next, we have blaming Charlie Kirk's assassination on free speech is dangerous from Bloomberg.com, posted by EmptyRow5585. And yeah, personally, I wouldn't blame Charlie Kirk's assassination on free speech. His free speech is what got him killed, I would say. But that doesn't mean free speech. Justifying others' free speech is justified. Censoring others' free speech is justified. If people do want to go after those whose freedom of speech they think is dangerous, ultimately people will justify what they justify. But I think Charlie Kirk wouldn't like Trump taking Kimmel off the air. I don't think Charlie Kirk would like Kimmel, but he was pretty big on free speech. He always liked going to the campuses to debate college kids. And now, it's just an irony that his death is now being used to push censorship. Censorship is never justified, especially when it's from the state. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump Justice Department closed investigation into Tom Homan for accepting bag of cash from NewYorkTimes.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, Mr. Homan came under scrutiny after he was said to be recorded last year taking $50,000 in cash from undercover FBI agents. And yeah, we talked about this story already. Ultimately, if Trump and his team don't want to hold Homan accountable for taking a bribe, that's fine. But I'm sure that the Democrats probably would do the same thing if it was one of theirs, and Reddit wouldn't care and would be swept under the rug. And it's just all theater, pretty much, as I said in regards to the last post in the story. If they want to. they're all pretty much part of the same team. It's a big club and you ain't in it, as George Carlin famously said. And it's just stories like this that are distract from that. It makes you, they make want people to think that, oh, their side is above, the other side is above the law, but our side is law abiding and good. And ultimately, I would say that it should be seen more as lesser of two evils, and even then, the lesser of two evils is still an evil. They're all going to screw you over, despite how Reddit thinks the Democrats might be better currently. But just because they think that doesn't make it true, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Oklahoma Republicans propose all state colleges must have Charlie Kirk statue, schools be required to build Memorial Plaza, and describe slain activists as civil rights leader or face fines. Post from TheGuardian.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's cross-post from the News of the Stupid subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think this is why you shouldn't have public universities in the first place. The government can make whatever stupid rules they want regarding them, and you might have to follow it. And yeah, personally, I think if colleges do want to build a Charlie Kirk statue and call him a civil rights leader, that's fine. But I don't think they should be forced to do it if they don't want to. But when they're public schools and government controlled, it's ultimately going to be at the whims of whatever the government is feeling on any given day. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have the trope of liberal media is finally dead from CNN Business. From CNN.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I think it looks like this article is going on about how since ABC is bending the knee to Trump, suddenly there's no more liberal media. It will just bend to whatever Trump says, and that's I think that's I think kind of a Reddit take on it. The media is definitely kind of DNC biased, especially when you look at shows like The View and and the whole channels like MSNBC. But regardless, it's in U.S. politics, everyone always has to constantly play themselves off as the victim. And I personally don't think it's all just theater. As I said, they're pretty much all on the same team. They just want to distract you from that. And it's stories like this that do it. Personally, I do think the media is DNC biased, but you do have Fox News, which is RNC biased as well, and they're pretty much all just the same headlines over and over again. The other side bad, our side good, etc., etc., and it's all just to distract that it's not that politics really isn't real. It's all just pretty much professional wrestling. The next we have Dem Slam giant $50,000 banners of Trump's face on DC buildings as propaganda from IrishStar.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the No Shit Sherlock subreddit. And yeah, personally, as I said earlier, I personally think there'd be better ways to spend $50,000 of government money, of taxpayer money. But ultimately, the government will justify throwing away money on whatever it wants to justify, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. I'm sure that Reddit would be fine if taxpayer money was used to push DNC propaganda, which it was for pretty much Biden's term. But so when it's used to push Trump's propaganda, suddenly it's the worst thing ever. And that just goes to show you they have no principles, only teams. You couldn't get Reddit to criticize Biden for the life of you during his term in office, but suddenly Trump's back in office, and suddenly you can't get Reddit to say one nice thing about the guy, and that just goes to show you, it's just whatever the narrative is. They have nothing. Reddit may claim to be a bunch of free thinking individuals, but they'll always bend over to the narrative whenever it comes knocking at the door. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're gonna wrap up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.